Okay, we're good to go.
Okay, great. So this is the Strategic Planning Committee. It is an offshoot of the Finance Committee. Just to remind everybody where this has gone and where it will be going. We had our initial meeting many months ago, actually, at this point, to really concretize a strategic plan. We had a goal of within 12 months to get that done. So we have a good handle on where the city's resources needs to go and what the future of the city is going to look like. When I started researching the process, Rick was very informative, and I started speaking to Susan and Dennis. And Susan and Dennis both mentioned that in previous positions, they have worked on extensively a strategic plan. So Dennis with the county and Susan through a different city. So they offered to start this process. And it could be when we, down the line that we might want to employ an outside agency, but right now it's going to be an internal process. And what we discovered when I was talking to both of them was that there are many, I'm going to repeat myself, but internal processes that are not complete within the city itself that need to get done before we even start thinking about, other larger issues. So I am going to turn the floor over to Susan and Dennis, and then we will open up for questions and discuss any issues that arise.
You want me to start, Dennis?
Sure, Susan, go right.
Well, thank you. Hello, everyone. So what we were in talking with Councilwoman Weiss, we were looking at going from things such as the policy manual, job descriptions, organizational charts, compensation scale for the city, and then getting into studies such as a facility study, a fleet management study, the infrastructure plan, and the capital plan for the city. So, and a lot of those are tied in with the budget, obviously, because if you're going to make these plans and take the time to go through the process of creating these plans, we want to make sure that these are things that can be appropriated for, so that we can accomplish, certain types of capital improvements, infrastructure improvements, buying, supporting our fleet. But then, as Councilwoman White said, there were some internal things that we wanted to kind of get in order to make, to kind of leading up to all of that, and then ultimately having a strategic plan. So I'll touch on the first parts, just kind of going through like with what we're doing with right now with for job descriptions. And when I talk about job descriptions, we're talking about the positions that are non-bargaining, full-time non-bargaining positions, because if groups are under a collective bargaining agreement, they're pretty much laid out what those jobs are, the expectations of those positions. So for the job descriptions, as I said, all the job descriptions for the full-time non-bargaining employees have been drafted and distributed to the directors at this point for review. The purpose of that is because you want to make sure it's not just for me to sit and update job descriptions, or for the mayor to write them, or Dennis, but you want buy-in from everyone in the administration, and that these directors know the positions and what's expected of all these positions. So I've received, I asked then for red line versions back if they, something I left out or something they want to change or add to, or something to take away. And so, so we have, those have all been distributed. I would say we probably have about 75% of them returned, so that I could get all of these. And once I receive all the red line versions back from the directors, then I make those changes. And then once those are received back, they'll be presented to the mayor for final approval, because that's really administrative of, now we will have on file up-to-date current job descriptions for all of these positions. There will be 2 part-time positions that will be included in that, and those are the 2 individuals that fall under Dennis in the finance department, just because of the role they play. So it's not going into, we'll get into the other part-timers down the road, but just to get this going and get the bulk of what we need done, those were the positions that we were looking on. And then based on those jobs, the organizational charts for the administration and then organizational charts broken down by department will be finalized. And the organizational charts will identify all of the positions, bargaining and non-bargaining, but then also interim positions, full-time, part-time, vacant positions, what positions are held that are under contract. For example, our city engineer is not an employee, but he's really a contract employee. So we'll break that down through all the charts as well. And then that'll give the committee a vision as to what positions exist in the city, what it can help when we anticipate vacancies in the coming year. It can help, especially when you're budgeting, what new positions are expected, because generally some departments will know through attrition what positions will be opening, what needs to be filled, or if there's a need for a new position, and then maybe there's a position that exists that you no longer need. So that would help. It helps give a visual and then also direction for the administration of what the administration and the city employee charts look like. And then it also identifies the reporting structure throughout the administration and the legislative bodies as well. So then once you have the job descriptions and the organizational charts, we get into the compensation scale. And the foundation of most compensation systems, it begins with the job descriptions. Because before you can evaluate and rank positions, you need to really understand the breadth and scope of the positions, and then the relationship of those positions within the city organizational structure. And so what we'll do is we begin the compensation review by first, as I said, reviewing and updating all the job descriptions with the directors within each department. And then this is an important part of the process, because since you can't really single-handedly understand, meaning me, if I'm writing these, I don't understand all of the positions. And I want to, and also I want to ensure the buy-in from the directors, as I mentioned before. And then it also, it creates ownership of the process from the director. So everybody has a hand in this of what these positions are about. And then once the job descriptions are reviewed and revised and discussed with the directors, with the mayor, then, and that's for each of the departments, then we begin to evaluate across the departments. And when you level the positions, that's when you look at evaluating the scope, the responsibility, the education, and the other credentials that's necessary to perform any particular job. And then lastly, you begin to survey the market for cost comparisons. So to the extent that it's possible, we try to align position titles, and that helps keep consistency across the departments and throughout the city. So for example, all administrative assistants, whether it's an administrative assistant from police department, fire department, building department, they really should be leveled the same across the board, as well as like the position for directors. So it doesn't matter what the department is, it's if position title, you really try to keep that within the same level. And then the positions, of course, would be slated into a compensation scale. And just as a side note, in looking at the compensation scales, they really usually, so when you have a scale, you have a minimum, a midpoint, and a maximum. And it's most commonly to have a range that's between 80% and 100%, 120%. And so what that means is that the 80% of the minimum's 80%, and then you have your midpoint, and so the minimum pay is 80% of the midpoint of that salary range, and then the maximum is 120% of that midpoint of that salary range. And the ranges should be reviewed, and they need to be, they may need to be increased, or it really tells you what the market is paying. And so, and most compensation scales have between 10 and 15 levels. And that's where it's a little challenging because of the limited number of jobs we're talking about. Again, it's non-bargaining. I don't know if we'll have that many scales because we really don't, we're talking about 20 some employees when we're creating this scale. So the systematic, and and it's an equitable system, and it's meant to serve many purposes. And one is you want an environment where directors understand and they have participated in the description of these positions within their departments. And then you have it also gives you that distinct level for advancement, because when you have that, you have compensation scales, you've got the org chart, then people could see where there could potentially be advancement within departments. And then you also have a defensible system in place, because if you don't have consistency across the board, that ultimately can lead to lawsuits, meaning you have people in this that have the same job, but somebody with the same title is making 20,000 more than somebody else. You could have a problem, especially if there's an age discrepancy or anything, so you want to be careful about that too. And that's why it's important to level these jobs across the board. So that's why it's really starting this whole thing back with updating, making sure we have updated current job descriptions when we lead into to ultimately have a compensation scale that would be presented to the committee. So that's something else that's being worked on. Also, I would just as a, I don't know if warning's the correct word, but when you start getting into compensation scales too, I don't know where that would fall in our current structure, meaning I don't know what people get paid right now. So one of the things the mayor and I were talking about was, I said, to really get the comp scale, I'm going to need to know, each person, what their title is and what they're paid. And, that's where sometimes when you do a compensation scale, you have to be aware that you may discover some people who are underpaid for what the market rate is. And you kind of want to have an idea as the council, especially, what ultimately you will do with positions like that. Is there going to be a decision that, well, if we know a position's underpaid, do we bring that person up? Or if somebody's overpaid, how do you handle that? Are you talking about just freezing wages? Are you talking about, do you cut somebody's pay? And so these are things that you do want to consider when you're talking about a compensation scale. It's not just about putting numbers on a piece of paper and saying we have a compensation scale. But the good thing is what the city had been doing, and this was from previous administrations, is that there were ordinances and they would say, oh, this job's created and this is how much that job's going to get paid. Well, that doesn't take into account how long that person's in this position. And if you weren't updating that ordinance every year, then these ordinances are outdated. People aren't getting paid what they might have been. That original ordinance said, oh, they're getting paid X amount of dollars, but then they've been here for 10 years. Then, it's really, you want to make sure all of that's in alignment, that you have ordinances. You don't want specific salaries in any kind of ordinance when a job is created, because then that limits you, or you have to keep bringing that ordinance back to council every time that position would get a raise, for example. And if you recall, when Dennis was hired, that was one of the issues, was the pay that was limited in that position. So that's why when you have these pay ranges, a position would go between that 80 and 120%. And then that gives council that flexibility, because you're not bringing people in at the maximum. You're usually bringing people in at the midpoint, and then they go from there. But then that gives you that flexibility. And then every year you review the compensation scale, so that to see whether it's cost of living, is there an increase to the scale? And that is something that would have to go back to council for any increase on an annual basis. So you say, if we increase the scale, you don't just keep adding to the maximum pay rate. You want to move the whole scale. So let's say, for example, you said, okay, this year the scale is going to increase by 1%. Then you move the whole range 1%, not just at the maximum, because then that's when you start getting a bigger gap in pay. But that's something that would be going back to council every year when you have those increases to any compensation scale once it's adopted. Any questions about any of that so far, or you want me to just keep going?
Yeah, when
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. You should call them, not me.
I just have two quick questions. In your job descriptions, are you, and I may have missed it, because my mind's sort of lutsy today. Do you have basic qualifications,
Oh, yes, it's, let me, see. So-
like minimum qualifications?
Oh, yeah, it's minimum, maximum. So the whole, and that's.
Not pay
I
scale.
could just go over it, but yeah, that's the other thing too. So every job description is going to be in the same format, because that's one of the issues that was here too. All the departments have their own formats and things are written differently. So this will have the same format. And so you would have like a header, and in the header, it says the position, the department it falls under, are they exempt status, where they fall on the compensation scale. So that would be identified. And so what I could do is, when we have a follow-up meeting, I'll bring a sample of that so you could see how every job's going to do it. So it'll state, what's the purpose of the position? What's, what is really the highlights of the position, minimum qualifications, education level, any specialization certifications. It lists all of that.
Amount of
And
experience.
then my second,
Absolutely.
then my second question, and this doesn't have to do specifically with what you're doing, Susan, but do we have that for the directors as well?
The job descriptions?
Yeah.
Well, that's what this was updated.
No, do we have that for the actual directors?
Yes. Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
good. That's,
Oh, yeah,
it was just a
absolutely.
question. I didn't know if we had them or
Oh,
not.
yeah, no, that's really primarily primarily when you're talking about the full-time non-bargaining positions, most of them are director positions.
Okay,
Two chiefs and then the directors.
okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so then, any other questions on that? Okay.
I have a question. So this is great for, each of the employees and directors, and this is something we may want to add in the future, but how are we supposed to right size a department? Is this something that will allow us to right size the building department or the service department or?
Well, that's why too, when you get into an organizational chart and you see what the need is and what positions are actually there, then that will let the administration know, hey, do you have enough people in this position, in this department? Is there a way to, maybe somebody needs to be moved to another department to help fulfill, some gap of services? Yes, that's what this is all kind of leads up to.
Yeah, I think the goal is, we don't have any of this information concretized right now, so we have to do this first before we do the analyze everything.
Right. So, so I just, so that's kind of what this is all leading to. Absolutely. Any other questions on that?
I have one quick question. Sounds like job descriptions, pay ranges, and an org chart. Those are the three big things you're producing.
Well, that's what right now, just to start off, that's just one of the things we're working on.
Mhm. And when do you think those three will be available?
Well, as I said, the job descriptions have been distributed to all the directors. When those come back, when I receive the rest of those back, then they'll all be presented to the mayor for the mayor to give his final approval of those job descriptions. And then they would be considered on file. Administered.
So
And then,
no date yet.
I mean, a specific date, no.
You have
but-
a target that you're aiming for?
Well, I mean, as the mayor and I talked today, it was, he was sending out a reminder to the directors like, hey, there's a couple of you that still didn't get Susan the stuff, so get it over to her. So as soon as they do that, I'm sorry, I have to just walk for a second here.
I think we can assign a timeline of within the next 2 weeks. We want that finished.
Oh, okay.
Well, but again, this is based on, the thing is I wouldn't call them finished. I may get them back, but then we have to give the people the time to, it gives directors when they have questions, and then for us to talk to to discuss that with the mayor and that department head. So I mean, a draft, yeah, drafts can be done, but the process to say, hey, okay, here's the job descriptions. This is what has been,
No, I meant the initial draft. I didn't mean
oh,
finalized.
all the drafts are done.
Okay.
Or,
So in your estimation, how long do you think that would take to finish?
well, let's say if I get them back, I mean, the number I need to get back are probably about 6 positions, I would say, then, so I would say, probably realistically, yeah, 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, well, I don't know people's schedules to sit and be able to talk to the mayor, if they had questions, and then to have the mayor have the opportunity to review all of these.
I think we're looking at drafts, not necessarily once they've been, thoroughly discussed with all the parties and, a more fine-tuned version.
So maybe we can, at the end of the meeting, go through some type of timeline, but just in the interest of time, okay, so we have the job descriptions, the salary charts.
Well, the org charts, no,
And
the
the org
salary
charts.
charts, I have to make sure I have every position.
Right.
Position that is for a job description has to be on the org chart, and everything that's reflected on the org chart, you got to make sure it's accurate. So then I go through with each director saying, hey, does this cover every position in your department, and confirm that. So like I said, it'd probably be at least, I mean, I'd like to say realistically, probably 3 weeks, just because I'm guessing based on other people. I'm relying on information from other people.
Okay.
And then the mayor's waiting on me to give him all of that. So,
Rick, your question was on timelines?
Yeah, I just wanted to know how long this process would take.
yeah, so I mean,
It sounds like my experience, you'd like it to be as soon as possible. So you're thinking 3 weeks, but realistically, since you depend on other people, if I were you, I would recommend, if I were your advisor here, I would recommend you allow yourself at least double that.
that
because-
we can assure by next month we'd have that job descriptions, org charts, and again, I really should confirm with the mayor that he'd have the time to read through them all and
That's why I'm thinking
and then starting
6
the
weeks is probably more reasonable.
The compensation scale is probably the touchier subject when you talk about that with a director. Because, then people, when they start looking at, it just in my experience, that's when you could start getting into some discussions.
One other thought I had while you were talking about this, after this is done and dusted, it has a shelf life. And I'm wondering what your plans are for making sure that all this information remains current.
As I was saying with the, like, just for example, with the comp scale, it's something that has to be revisited every year, and it should, especially for the budget. And based on the comp scale, you have to make sure the job descriptions still match and are leveled appropriately. So that's why I think they're all tied in. It's really an annual review of this once it's in place.
So you're thinking that you would go through an exercise like this annually?
Well, yeah, you don't really have to rewrite the job description.
No, but a
some of
maintenance
these were so
exercise.
old. But the comp scale, yeah. So it's really just about, is there going to be an increase to the comp scale? If it is, that goes to council. With council, then, was there a change? Was there a new creation of a position? Was there an elimination of a position? So that's why I mean, it's kind of tied together.
Right.
To me,
So I'm thinking part of maybe one other thing you might want to deliver along with this is a sketch of how that annual review process would go, so that that doesn't have to be reinvented.
sure,
You can tie it with the budget discussion.
right.
Okay, Susan, was there anything else you were working on, or is Dennis the next?
No, the only other thing was the facility plan. So I don't know if, so, you know, we have a list of locations of what all the city facilities are. And then in going through this and talking with Jeff out of service, Chief Rogers out of police, and Chief Perko out of fire, we then dug up that report that Win Weiser presented to council. Actually, it was the first time I ever met Win, was spring of 2019, and you gave a report from the Mayor's Municipal Future Committee. And that committee reported on, it was to discuss the future of our municipal facilities. And really based on that report, and that we could provide to the committee members so that everybody would have that. And then talking with each of the departments who have their own buildings. And by the way, they're all willing to come to this committee and tell you about really how, to be blunt, how deplorable the working conditions are in every single city building. And you know, what the conditions that they have to work in and their employees have to work in every day. And really based on the report that Win had presented back in April of 2019, nothing's changed except the buildings have gotten worse. That's, you know, pretty much. And really, and Dennis will talk about the long-term strategies for facilities is his report, but based on my discussions with the directors and reading through these old reports, you know, the city really needs to consider moving forward and pursuing a consultant who can conduct a formal facility study. What we could do is internal, but when you get a formal, you do a full needs assessment on a facilities, that's when they're looking at air quality, energy consumption, square footage, number of people in the buildings, and just really the conditions. And we really need to generate some type of master plan to address the facility needs that exist throughout the municipal campus, which includes the administration building, the police department, fire department, service department. And even if we look at our parks and pools, not that they would play as much of a priority as these other buildings, but I will tell you, we have our two safety forces. Our safety forces are being challenged with getting people to work, because when people see the conditions, it turns employees away. And it's really, you don't want bottom of the barrel when you're getting police and fire. You want to be in the market and get the best. And people have left, and in their exit interviews have reported it's because of the working conditions. Not the people, it's not the job, but it's the facilities that they have to work in. And
I mean, I would go even further. Listen, I'm not sure we need a facility study. We know that we need new facilities.
It's the capital plan to pay for it.
Right. It's more, how are we going to pay and where is it going to be?
And that's where Dennis is going to jump in.
Yeah.
About long-term strategies. So
Agreed.
I can forward that report if the committee would like. I'll send it over to you if you'd like, Councilwoman Weiss, because unless I can get everybody's emails, I don't believe I have
I
every.
can forward it to everybody.
So I will send that off tomorrow as well.
Oh, one question about the facilities and the deplorable conditions.
Mhm.
Is there anything, do you know of anything that's an actual safety hazard?
Yes, there's, I would encourage everyone on this committee to come and arrange with the chiefs and Jeff Percorny and walk through, and the mayor, and walk through each of their individual buildings. You have to see it, you have to experience it, you have to smell it. It is unpleasant. And I'm sorry, but I want to be brutally honest with this committee, that the conditions are, I work in the annex across the street. And that's because that was a newly renovated space.
Mhm.
That is a saving grace to me, because I'll tell you what, I do not want to work in any of those other buildings. And I'm just being honest, because they are they're gross, and you need to go and walk through them. And yes, there are safety hazards. There are ADA issues in all of these. We're working out of houses. that are not ADA compliant, by the way. It's just not, it's not a good representation of city facilities.
If
But
it gives you any perspective, our jails weren't good enough for prisoners.
yeah, right, right. So, but I would encourage you to all really go and because I could take pictures and we have pictures, but the pictures don't do it justice. I really would encourage you to go and go look in the fire department and police department in particular.
I know.
And it's just, and remember, these are people that are there, the firemen sleep there. And it's just, yes, there are tons of safety issues. And I'm saying that I'm not a professional for facility studies, so this is Susan Drucker's opinion. They're not good working conditions.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Dennis.
Well, as Susan indicated, basically the elephant in the room that's going to impact the city's budget, not only in 2021, but probably for a multitude of years in the future, is going to be how to redo these facilities in such a way that we can address those concerns, either from a health standpoint, ADA compliance, and as Susan indicated, how do we make the facilities an attraction for employees so you get the best employees? And there's plenty of, I won't double down on all the safety issues here or the code violations that we could probably be citing ourselves through. There's probably more leaks in here than in Washington, DC right now. So what I'd like to do is kind of propose a change in how we go about trying to get some direction to fix some of this. Last year was a complete anomaly with all the COVID, the implications that it had, not only in our operations, the administration of the facilities, but financially, we were the benefactor of getting about $1.2 million from the federal government as a pass-through with the county. We were able to make use of that money to offset primarily salary expenses for safety forces. We also spent a considerable sum on PPE and other one-time things that were pretty much directly attributable to COVID. So what that's done for us now, the position it's put us in right now, is that we have extra money in the general fund that we did not anticipate having. So we're just closing out the year and the month right now. But for example, we started the year with the general fund balance a little bit under $4 million. We ended it with $5.1 million. So our balance effectively went up. So what that should do is put us in a position to address a longer term solution to how we get new facilities. And I have kind of broached the subject with the mayor, mentioned it to Mrs. Weiss as well, is that what I would recommend is that we establish a formal facilities improvement fund, a separate capital fund, with some restrictions on what the money can be used for. I would have council approve establishment of that fund via legislation sooner rather than later, and then come up with a plan on how we're going to deposit money in that fund, either through a transfer. We talked last year about the need to have an ongoing 10-year funding of this 27th pay phenomenon that we had to deal with in 2020, so that we can avoid having to budget or account for some kind of extraordinary expense that once every 11 years. So we're in the process of doing that. We started it last year with a $13,000 transfer. We'll be transferring 24, 25, 26 per year for those 10 years. So when that bill comes due to be paid 11 years from now, you have the money. So we're going to try and take a similar approach I propose to doing this with this facilities fund. One of the luxuries that we will have is that in 2022, The last payment on the general obligation bonds is due. That's about $280,000. That's going to be done. The millage for that will be available to do whatever else you would like to do with that. So that could be an addition, an annual addition that won't impact anybody's taxes. It's already on the tax duplicate now. You can shift that around. You can put it in the general fund. You can attribute it to this new fund if we get that created. But what I would propose is that we start in this budget process with some kind of incremental transfer from the general fund, since we do have some extra cash at this point in time, and get that fund going so that you can at least provide some kind of mechanism to get preliminary studies done. And I think that goes beyond hiring a consultant to do a feasibility study. I think once you want to get into renderings and plans and drawings and that sort of thing, you're going to have a mechanism to pay those folks. So we have one more year past this year of making that bond payment. That theoretically could free up about $280,000. That obviously is not going to pay for new facilities for police, fire, service, and the administration, but at least it'll give you some basis to get the ball rolling. I think we have to make some kind of commitment to doing it, and I think that should be done sooner rather than later. I think we're running a lot of legal risks, both into, I mean, we can't hire a female firefighter. That's kind of absurd when you're talking about 2021 and trying to be all inclusive, but we're limiting ourselves in terms of our buildings as to what kind of resources we can use. That's something that I think we need to address. But my plan is to incorporate this into the budget process, set up a proposed annual transfer that goes into this fund, and make use of some of the monies that if you remember, we passed an ordinance that limited the level that the general fund could drop to before it triggered a number of different things. We're pretty far away from what that number is. So we should make use of some of those balances now, and then come up with, as soon as we have an idea of what we would propose to do or how we're going to do it, who's going to go first in terms of a facility, then we can look at some more definitive ways to fund it. And whether that is for tax increase, issuance of bonds, there's a whole combination of different things we can do. But I do think we can make use of the money we have now, and then bank on that money after 2022 of just keeping that money where it is and bringing it into that fund. You know, in 10 years, you would have, almost $3 million in that fund. If you keep putting that bond money into that once the liability is exhausted. So the first step is to kind of position this as part of the budget process for 2021, which I'm in the middle of doing. And then to get everybody's feelings at some point down the line as to who's going to take command of doing the whole facility analysis and see where we can go, put some kind of logical plan in place as to what we can do and how we do it. We're going to need to kind of play checkers here. Somebody's got to go first in terms of any kind of major facility overhaul. We got to determine if we need some extra space just to kind of serve as a launching pad. But I do think it's important. Susan and a number of the other directors have indicated that it is a detriment to keeping employees, and it's something that we should address.
Dennis, I'm always so heartened by your innovative thinking. So I want to thank you for that. We've been talking about this for a while. I know I have been in those facilities, and I would agree with everybody. I think we all have, and that it needs to be done. And we've talked about that for a while. The cost is, we have property that we could probably use in a number of ways creatively It's just, you know, that ticket. To have this excess, if you will, right now, I'd like to see some of that put into some kind of a prudent reserve aside from this. But I would like to see a nice chunk start this fund that you're talking about that can be augmented annually. Certainly, you know, $3 million isn't going to get you much when you're building a new municipal center. So
Right.
we're going to have to find lots of other ways to fund it. John Rock can speak to that. He knows what these cost.
Actually, I was
But
just gonna say, you're doing some state work where, this is actually my old firm, when we would do university projects, and oftentimes a developer would just build it, and the owner, who would be the university, would just lease. They would still own the land, but the developer would own the building and the state would lease the space. Because a lot of these universities don't have the money to build the buildings anymore.
I mean, the firm that I was at was their bread, you know, bread and butter, meat and potatoes was building PK through 12 schools, universities, and municipal centers. And, you know, they were a design build firm. But it's a whole lot more money than what we just were talking about now.
Yeah, I mean, you know, this meeting is just kind of preliminary, you know, discussion without getting into the weeds. But yeah, we know it's going to be, you know, at least $10 million we're going to need probably. But Dennis, did you also include some type of capital fund in the strategic plan for vehicles and other capital assets that we need?
Yeah, that was the other thing that I was going to mention, that we could also set up some special revenue funds and dedicate a portion of money that's produced by a specific department, say the fire department. You can take a percentage of the EMS collections that we get and deposit those either on a monthly basis or one time annually in that. And in the theory there is that you're allowing the department to get the benefit of the services that they are providing to the residents. Doesn't have to be a monumental amount, but at least it'll give you some basis that you can build a plan that can pay for the annual fleet maintenance upgrades. You could do that with revenue produced by the police departments in terms of citations, court revenue, that sort of thing. There's a lot of different ways, and I would also say that we should probably pursue one or more of those. It's common practice in a lot of cities to use that money so that it's not, you're not putting all the pressure on the general fund all the time to make transfers out of. So it's a consistent revenue source. EMS billings here are $275,000, give or take a little bit every year. That goes in the general fund now. It's undedicated, it's unrestricted. If you took, 10% of those monies every year, you would put $28,000 in that fund every year, and then try and coincide that with the fire department's vehicle replacement plan and allocate a portion periodically of a transfer in years that you needed to. But you don't then need to come up with $250,000 for an ambulance in a given year. You don't, we could set aside money for replacement based on their schedules that they've come up with. And the police and fire have done a very good job putting together their replacement analysis. So we could use that as a basis for creation of these. But that's something that I'd like to talk more about.
I like that idea.
We
And then
can,
how does service and building get those funds for a fund for themselves?
well, we could have for anything that is something not specific to safety forces, we could either take a portion, like right now, it's 95% of the income tax that's collected goes into the general fund. Up to 5% can be allocated for the capital fund, which is what we're doing. Again, we started that later in the year. We had slowed down the income tax going into capital because of the need to have cash for the 27th pay and a couple other things. So you could allocate a percentage of that income tax collected to go to support that in terms of general administrative needs for vehicles that are in building, housing, service. Or we could take a portion of the proceeds, like the proceeds from the special rubbish pickup. By ordinance, council could just say that's going to go into a vehicle replacement. So there's a lot of options that I can outline for everyone. That's more of a council discussion, I think, but it also, what you'd like to do is to tie up as much of the major commitments you have over short and long term related to facilities and vehicles, tie that up with regular funding sources so that you're not looking at, as huge blips, huge variances in the general fund year to year. And it keeps your ability then to gauge how your general fund is doing by taking out some of those things that are basically one-time costs.
Right, and they're independently funded, if you will.
Yeah, and it back to Mr. Rock's point, when I work for the county building is leased. It's on 9th and Prospect there. That
Yeah,
building,
that's right, it is.
all that facilities, that was all done. We owned a hotel, which I never understood. I said, we own a hotel, but we lease it on. So didn't really understand.
But if you could put a building on that corner there of Silsby and Warrensville, I mean, it could lend itself to other offices too, or retail,
Yeah.
or it could be a mixed use, and it could make a developer, attractive to the project and save costs for us.
Dennis, was there anything else in your report?
That's about it right now. Just like I said, I'm trying to get the budget together. We are kind of hit from 3 different directions. I have to file everything with the county for year end. We're in the process of closing the system down to go through all the protocols that we need to follow from an accounting standpoint. And so the priority is on getting the budget done and getting some preliminary documentation out to everybody in the next couple of days.
So Susan and Dennis, what would the next meeting look like? Like, what are the deliverables? What would you be presenting? Like, what are next steps?
Next steps would be that once the mayor's approved the job descriptions, we could show you what will be, I guess what is the current job descriptions, the organizational charts, a compensation scale. I don't know if I'd have the people placed on it yet, but at least to give you, maybe to give the committee an idea of where the compensation scale is before, and how I came about it prior to putting people on it. And then, of course, you're going to have the the budget hearings are starting Monday or Wednesday. And so I think Dennis, as he gets the budget together, that'll give a better idea as far as capital, infrastructure, and fleet of what can be, how much money would be appropriated to then make a plan of what purchases could be made. And then some of these reserve funds that Dennis is talking about, I think right, Dennis, you'd probably have a much better idea in a month or so.
I can get a little synopsis of various funding sources that could be dedicated, particularly for the fleet portion of things. What revenue comes in that's specific to a department that council could say, hey, we want that money to go to replacing vehicles and build that reserve up over time. So I can give you kind of maybe some context or perspective of what those various sources are that we could use.
Okay, so it sounds like the next meeting, we will have some concrete deliverables that we can discuss. And then going forward, it sounds like we might need to, at that point, really discuss, facilities.
Mhm.
And how that's going to play itself out. Were there any other questions for either Susan or Dennis?
No, but I wanted to thank you, Mrs. Weiss and Mr. Kennedy and Mrs. Drucker. This is long overdue. We're moving into a space where we're much more professional and much more accountable. I think it says a lot about how we can move forward more productively. It's a lot of work, and I give you lots of kudos. This is a huge project. Thank you.
We've been talking about this for 30 years and at least 30 years. Actually, tonight, I think we made more progress than I've ever heard. So thank you both.
Mhm.
And we all have to start, I guess, ideating on how are we going to sell this to our residents, right?
Mhm.
It needs to be an experience for them. They don't want to hear that, oh, our facilities are run down and, we need to build a new police and fire station, a new administration center. They need buy-in, and they need to feel that they are gaining something, whether it's a rec center, whether
Right,
it's.
some kind of community center
Something.
involved. Yeah.
So we just have to start, thinking, how are we going to get that buy-in for them and give them that experience that they need? So, okay, so hopefully within the next 6 weeks, we will have another meeting. And go Buckeyes.
Go Browns.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.